You're listening to the 49 Carats podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats podcast. I'm your host, Steph, and I'm joined here by a very good friend of the pod, Jordan Elliott of Niners Nation. How you doing today, Jordan?
I'm fantastic. I know we're here to talk 49ers football, but it is game one of the finals, and I am ecstatic about that. So the mood is very high today. Frank Gore's back. Like, how could you know? The sun's out. There's the list of positivity is just never ending today.
There we go. I love the positivity. We need that today. Frank Gore. We'll talk about Frank Gore. We'll talk about Alex Mack. But let's start with Frank Gore. I mean, what a guy. What can you say about this guy? He signed a one-day contract to retire as a 49er. And we all feel the same about Frank Gore. We love him for good reason. Just part of his career, suffered 2 torn ACLs in college. He was drafted by the 49ers in 2005. He was a 4th-round pick. He was in the NFL for 16 seasons, 10 of those with the 49ers. Most games played by a running back in NFL history with 241 games. He's on the NFL's 3rd most carries and 3rd most rush yards lists. He had 3,735 carries and a perfect 16,000 rushing yards. Jordan, do you have a favorite Frank Gore moment? There's too many.
Probably the go-ahead touchdown in Atlanta, probably from the NFC Championship game, the year they went to the Super Bowl and unfortunately lost to the Ravens. Just the magnitude of that moment was pretty big. But yeah, there's just too many with him. When I think of Frank Gore, I just think of a guy where when it felt like every rushing lane was closed, every door was blocked off, any opportunity to advance the football was taken off the table, this guy somehow managed to turn what should have been a tackle for loss into a 4, 5, 6-yard gain, and did that with regularity at a time when the 49ers, frankly, just weren't very good, and was a guy that felt like was the engine for an offense that had no business being in a lot of the games they were in, and they were in large part because of Frank Gore. And once they started building up that offensive line, and you saw them bring in guys like Joe Staley, and you saw them bring in guys like Upati and Davis, I really thought that we saw the Frank Gore that had always been there. But to see what he had done before the offensive line was really at that level, that to me is what I will always remember about Frank Gore, is that somebody that always made something out of nothing. Whenever I hear people talk about Barry Sanders, that's always what they say, that, oh, Barry turned a 5-yard loss into a 20-yard gain. Well, I'm not saying Frank Gore is Barry Sanders. They're 2 totally different players. That's kind of how I feel about Frank Gore. He was somebody that just blew me away with his ability to turn nothing into something and to do it as frequently as he did.
I think people don't talk about that enough, like nationally. Like, of course, 49er fans, love him and know what he did for this franchise. And you said it, even when they were bad, when the rest of the team was bad, he can really rally the team. But I feel like that's such an underrated part of his game that not a lot of running backs can do. We look at some running backs today that just, I don't want to say they lack the physicality, but you don't see physicality like that anymore in today's NFL, at least from the running back position. So I just appreciate Frank Gore so much and what he did for the franchise. I really wish he could have gotten a ring with the team or just anywhere. I would have loved if he got a ring with like the Bills or something like that, just so he can have one. But all right, I would have probably said the same thing about favorite Frank Gore moment, the comeback win against the Falcons, hitting the dirty bird and everything. But yeah, he has so many. Evan posted earlier about the game. He had 2 touchdowns against the Seahawks, which I think he had like a 79-yard touchdown, and then another one that was an 80-yard touchdown. Also amazing. And yeah, when you see him run, it's like he just keeps on going. He is a tank. He definitely earned that name. What if you had to sum Frank Gore up in one word? what would you describe him as?
Heart.
Heart. I love that.
Heart would be the word, because he's somebody that I just felt to overcome the adversity that he did and to just play the role that he did, and the way he represents not only himself, but the teams he's played for, the 49ers more specifically. He is somebody to me that just embodies what makes the sport of football so great. And that's one of the reasons why I personally believe he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think that he's somebody, when you look at the definition of what the criteria is for Hall of Fame, they talk about representing the excellence of the game of football. And I can't think of anybody that I've watched in my lifetime that I would say exemplified that more than Frank Gore did. Another thing I just remember too, when you were saying favorite moments, one that I completely spaced on, but is all-time favorite moment, was when they were playing the Bears. I believe it was 2012. And Lance Briggs, who was an all-pro linebacker, fantastic player for the Bears for a long time, is blitzing, and Frank Gore is back in pass protection, and he put Briggs on his back. And it wasn't just like caught him off guard. It was head up, these two meeting in the gap, and Frank Gore put him on his back. And again, this wasn't just some replacement level player. This was one of the best linebackers in the entire NFL. And Frank Gore not only, embraced that challenge, he dominated that challenge. And that to me speaks volumes about the kind of player he was. There's plenty of running backs in the NFL that love carrying the football, but don't want to get in there and pass block on, passing situations, third down. Frank Gore was somebody that just wanted to help the team win. And I felt like plays like that really, describe the kind of player and the person Frank Gore was.
Yeah, exactly. And I like the word heart to describe him, because he really does embody that. The one word I would use, relentless. Like we mentioned earlier, you give him the ball, it looks like it should be a tackle for loss, and somehow he finds a way to just not just break away for a big run, but oftentimes break away for a touchdown, which just amazing. Definitely going to miss. I've been missing him as a 49er, but it's great to know that the 49ers did induct him to the team's Hall of Fame. And you mentioned, I was going to ask you actually if you thought that he was a Hall of Famer and he deserves to be in Canton. And I'm glad that you said that he does, because I 100% agree. And I hope the people who vote on it definitely agree as well, because man, if he can't get a ring, at least give him a gold jacket, man. That guy deserves it. So yeah, that's Frank Gore. And yeah, we'll just continue to cherish all the memories that he's given us as fans. But there's another retirement that was announced today. It's feeling like that one off season where everyone just retired. we thankfully just one from this current team. So Alex Mack, and the writing had been on the wall for a while. Even this morning, we heard about the fact that he had restructured his contract. It gave the team $4.3 million in cap savings. So now we know it was officially announced that he is going to be retiring. I guess the good news was that the cap savings, it gave the 49ers some space to start signing these rookies. Samuel Womack, Drake Jackson, Danny Gray, they've already signed them to the rookie contracts after that news. But the bad news is, who the hell starts at center this year? Jake Brendel's a name we hear pretty often, Daniel Brunskill, even J.C. Tretter, free agent center, has been thrown around as an option. You, Jordan, actually mentioned Nick Zakelj earlier as a strong possibility to end up being the center for the 49ers. Now, for Zakelj, do you see that as a long-term answer at center, or do you think he can contribute as early as this year?
I think he realistically could now. I got to talk to his offensive line coach, and a lot of people be like, okay, well, he's not going to say negative things about a player he coached, but you'd be surprised about how open a lot of these college coaches are about their experience with players, how they feel about certain players. And he was very quick to tell me that it wasn't just the physical ability with Zakelj, it was the mental ability and his ability to ID defenses, his ability to go up and combo block from the inside, his ability to, as he described it, play within a phone booth kind of game on the interior. He actually thinks that Zakelj, who played tackle at Fordham, profiles better as an interior lineman. So yeah, I think he's somebody that definitely could be the center, not only now, but going forward. His physical ability is extremely impressive. His RAS score, relative athletic score, for those who like stuff like that, is extremely high. I believe they profiled him as a guard for that metric, and he placed like 23rd out of like 1,300 guards over the last 25 years. So he's definitely in the upper percentile for just having raw athletic ability. He has the mental ability. And realistically, like, you know, with Kyle Shanahan, he tends to prefer veterans at most positions, which you can't fault anybody for wanting somebody with more experience, no matter what you're doing. But I don't think it's a situation where it's like Kyle's going to default to a veteran just because he won't have a rookie at that spot no matter what, right? Like, right. All due respect to Jake Brendel. Jake Brendel has 166 career snaps at center across 4 seasons. He's 30 years old. He does have the year of experience at, being on the roster, but at the same time, I don't think that necessarily means that just because he may be number 1 on the depth chart right now by default, that he will be when training camp and the season rolls around. I also think that Brunskill's realistically in play too. He's somebody that they had take snaps at center during that 2020 season when we remember they had a revolving door at the position. Hronis Grasu was even taking snaps there for certain games. So they have some options on the table. Funny enough, before I hopped on with Steph, I'm actually writing something for Niners Nation right now about how I think they have 5 options in-house that they could use. As for the Treader thing, I understand the production was there, and I know we've seen some stuff. Javi put out a great tidbit earlier about how he wasn't practicing during the season. He was just pretty much going out and playing, and he played at a very high level for somebody who wasn't practicing. But I'm also kind of like, well, you know what? It's the beginning of June. Teams are kind of in the swing of their offseason activities, and nobody else has signed him. There might be something there that we are not aware of, and that's, I'm not saying that it's, a total indictment that he hasn't been signed, but there may be more at play considering the production and the fact that nobody's really gone out of their way to bring him in the building yet. So I would pause on the JC Treader as just an immediate replacement, an immediate fix there. And I also think that the 49ers are in a spot where you have a young core, you have a young quarterback. It probably would be good to try and get a center that fits the timeline of that young core rather than just recycling guys that are kind of on the back 9 of their career in their mid to late 30s.
Yeah, I agree with that. Interesting enough, there's kind of been a revolving door on the center position since Kyle Shanahan has even been a coach for the 49ers. 2017, Daniel Kilgore. 2018 and 19, Weston Richburg. He was actually the only one to this point who has played more than 1 season for the 49ers at center. Ben Garland, 2020. And as we know, Alex Mack last year, and he only played the 1 season. Credit to Akash for pointing that out earlier. But so are you concerned at all about the centers that they currently have? I know you're going to, probably release that article, and you guys all check out Jordan's pieces on Niners Nation. He writes some great stuff. So I'll be on the lookout for that one. But do you have any concerns at all with the current core?
I mean, yes, just based on the fact that in the context of you're losing Alex Mack, yes, I have concerns that there will probably be a certain level of adjustment and, I don't want to say drop off because I don't think that it's fair to just immediately say that whoever replaces him won't be as good. But the bar has been set very high. Alex Mack is a really, really good player. He has been for a long time. And I thought that was one of the first things I noticed at training camp last year was that the interior of the offensive line just looked better all around. And I think having that just veteran with the ability and the IQ that Mack possessed made everybody around him better. So my concern would be that it's not going to be as easy as just plugging in a guy like Mack the way they did last year. But I'm not sitting here worried that this is something that's going to, prohibit them from being a playoff team and being a team that can reach double-digit wins. I think personally, the interior of the offensive line is in much better shape than it's being led on. I understand that you had a proven commodity in Tomlinson, you had a proven commodity in Mack, and you can't just count on whoever's replacing them to be as good. But I do think the options that they have in-house are more than capable of playing at a level that will be adequate enough for them to be a playoff team still. Like, I don't think this is something where we're going to be 7 weeks in and Trey Lance is, leading the league in sacks taken and they can't block anybody up the middle. I'm at this point not too concerned about that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I see a lot of people like freaking out and kind of panicking. And I also want to point out the fact that I think the 49ers, even though they kept saying, he's still undecided, I think they had an idea where he was leaning towards. And I recall John Lynch saying even before the draft, we gathered all the information that we need, before the draft. And so I would assume by then they already had a good idea and they're not just going to go willy-nilly, no plan, no backup plan for Alex Mack, right? So I think they've thought about it. I think they're currently comfortable with who they have. One question for you, Jordan. So last year you were at training camp, and as we know, Jimmy Garoppolo was in the picture, so he got most of the first team reps. I'm just curious, who was the second team center working with Trey Lance? And I wonder if that has any maybe some indication of who he might just gel with naturally this year.
So off the top of my head, if I recall correctly, there were 3 guys that got the majority of that work. One of them is Dakota Shepley, who was on he ended up getting cut. The Seahawks picked him up. I believe he's still in Seattle. I might be wrong on that though. The other was Brendel, and then they actually had Daniel Brunskill take a considerable amount of snaps with Trey Lance and that second unit. And at the time, I thought that was kind of noteworthy. It seemed like maybe they were, just kind of feeling things out for a couple days here or there. But I do think that it was interesting that they had Brunskill, who's the starting right guard, taking snaps with that second unit. And it could have just been to get whoever they had getting work in at right guard with the first team. It could have just been a default like that. But it wasn't just one specific person. It was the combination of those 3. But it was Brendel, Shepley, and Brunskill for the most part.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And that's who we pretty much figure will be at the top of that competition, this offseason and in this year's training camp. So that makes sense. And I guess it's just good to know that those guys do have some experience already with Trey Lance. And as Kai said earlier, Trey Lance can help mold the future center and vice versa, right? So, hopefully we get a 1-2 punch, there at the offensive line. But good to know also that you're not worried about the offensive line, because I feel like there's so many changes that happened in this offseason regarding the offensive line. So I think my expectations are not high, obviously. It's not as high as it was last season because there were just so many veterans on that line. I think we'll see in the first couple weeks of the season, there's going to be a lot of gelling happening, and not everything is going to be perfect right away. But I also don't think that is an indication of how they'll be performing by the end of the season. So I'm hopeful there. But let's move on to some OTAs talk. Couple interesting things we heard about yesterday. Ambry Thomas, Aaron Banks, they put on some muscle this offseason. That could bode well for the both of them. Banks, he was able to convert some of his fat to muscle, and we can assume that he's going to have a larger role this year. At the very least, he's going to get every opportunity to compete for a role on that offensive line. So what would be your projection for Aaron Banks this season? Do you think he'll be starting at some point?
Yeah, I think he's going to be the week 1 starter at left guard. I to this point have no reason to change my belief in him. After watching him at Notre Dame, it's been a considerable amount of time watching him coming out last year. I really liked his tape. I was admittedly surprised that they took him where they took him. He wasn't a guard that I had kind of projected to the 49ers. I thought that he kind of broke the mold of the kind of fleet of foot, more zone heavy guards that they had taken in years past. But had on the roster in years past. He was the first guard that they actually invested, a significant amount of draft capital into. But I think he's a really good player. I think he's somebody that unfortunately had his rookie year preseason and training camp derailed due to injury, and that's something that doesn't get talked about enough. And the other thing is, when you have a guy like Laken Tomlinson at left guard, who was a Pro Bowl player last year, who's been playing at a high level, and you have a guy like Daniel Brunskill, who is the most underappreciated member of the San Francisco 49ers, who is a very, very, very solid player and a starter in the NFL. It's not an indictment on Aaron Banks that he didn't just immediately replace one of them and come in and start, or that the 49ers didn't make a switch when they're reeling off this winning streak towards the back end of the season, that they're like, okay, well, Aaron Banks is looking a little bit better. Let's take out what's been working and put in this rookie. I think that it's totally understandable that the season went the way it did for him. And now, just like you mentioned, you're hearing things about how he's in better physical shape. He's obviously has a year under his belt in the system. So I have every right to every inclination to believe that he is somebody that is going to have a prominent role as a starter. I've been saying for a few months that I think it'd be better to move him back to the left side. Then you keep Brunskill on the right side. You have a replacement for Tomlinson. You're not shuffling the offensive line more than you need to. And you also have him playing directly next to Trent Williams, which will kind of effectively mask some of the deficiencies that are going to be there for anybody going through that learning curve in the NFL. So I think he's going to be the starting left guard. I think he's going to be a good player, and I still have a tremendous amount of belief that was a good pick, and it's somebody that's going to pan out for them.
Yeah, I agree, and I saw Javi mention this before. I think it might have been today or yesterday that he thought that Aaron Banks, along with a lot of the picks that they made in last year's draft, were more for this season, than they were for last season. And so I think that's what a lot of people didn't really take into account. You just see guys not starting right away and everyone freaks out. But, some of these things take time. And just like Trey Lance, like they have to get these reps to continue to improve, and having an entire off season to really get continue to get their feet wet and improve is a really great opportunity. So obviously Aaron Banks making the most of that opportunity, and Ambry Thomas as well. But I'm hearing a lot of good things about Talanoa Hufanga. And it seems like he might be able to make a sophomore leap. I know there's a lot of there's two sides to this, right? There's people who just love Hufanga, and from the beginning, they were like, oh, like he's gonna take over Tart's spot and he's great for that and whatnot. And then there's the other side that, he's got a lot to improve on, and he's not the most physically gifted guy. He's not the fastest safety. And when you're a safety, you got to be able to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time, especially now in today's NFL where everyone is freakishly fast. So I want to know what side you're on, and also why do you think the 49ers are so confident in Hufanga?
I think that he's somebody who is capable of playing, a prominent role in the defense. My whole thing is that I don't know that he can do a lot of the things they did with Jaquiski Tartt, because I think Jaquiski Tartt, again, was one of the more underrated players on the 49ers team, did a lot of things that weren't really appreciated by, the general fan base of the 49ers. And it's been that way for a few seasons now. And that's not an indictment on Hufanga. That's just kind of, unfortunately, Tartt being underappreciated and undervalued. But I do think that the biggest thing that stood out to me about Hufanga last season was, I remember during the beginning of training camp, so it's end of July, early August, a lot of these guys coming in are just kind of, getting used to the speed of the NFL game, getting into the preseason, regular season, all that stuff. He was out an hour before everybody else on the field, getting in extra work with DB coaches, getting in extra conditioning, staying after practice. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. It was every single day he was the first person out there. So I thought that kind of spoke volumes about not only his work ethic, but his understanding that, yes, I got drafted, but it's going to take more for me to carve out a prominent role on this really good defense. Right. And the other thing is his statement, I believe, I don't want to misquote it, but I believe he said something last season about wanting to be a Pro Bowler as a special teamer and taking pride in being a guy that can make a difference on special teams. So I think the 49ers have been sold over the last year on Hufanga the person as much as Hufanga the player, and they see that he's somebody that's going to put in the extra time, put in the extra work, understands that, yes, well, I want to be a starting safety and I want to have this prominent role. I also am going to take great pride with the difference I can make as a special teams player. And I think that carries a lot of weight because, again, just like you mentioned, he may not be the fastest player. There may be certain situations where they don't, feel comfortable leaving him as the deep third safety. But I still think that he's somebody that can be a good player for this defense. And I am very encouraged by the amount of work ethic he has displayed, because I think that's one thing that gets lost on a lot of people is I think a lot of people just assume that if you're an NFL player, you made it to the NFL, they're all working super hard. While the majority are, you'd be surprised at how much of a difference taking that extra step can go. And not every single player is out there coming out an hour and a half before practice starts and getting an extra work. Like, it's just realistically not how it's going. And Hufanga showed that he was willing to do that day in and day out. And I'd imagine that's how he's attacking the offseason and how he's attacking his private workouts and everything. And I think that alone is part of the reason why the 49ers feel as confidently as they do about him, and probably why they feel confident he's going to be able to take a leap because of the mentality he has when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely seems like he can, he's trying his best to close that gap, right? And it can be done because, like you said, there's some players who can be the most physically gifted, but if they're not working at it, they're just staying the same. And then there's guys who can continue to improve some little things and maybe even like the cerebral aspect of the game, which is a huge part of the game. If they can improve on that, they can help close that gap. D'Amico Ryans on Hufanga, he said, "This offseason has been eye-opening for me to see the way Huff is communicating out there. Louder, better. Huff is definitely ascending in the right direction." So I'm definitely, rooting for him. I mean, Jordan, do you see the team pairing him up with Jimmy Ward as the starter?
I could see that scenario playing out. I would like to see him and Odom on the field and get a better sense of them in real time and how they're moving around once, pads start coming on and things get a little bit more serious. But I certainly think it's within the realm of possibility. And one thing that really did stand out to me last year about Hufanga, and even if you go back to his tape at USC, is that, again, while he may not be the most physically gifted player where the traits are jumping off the board, his instincts are tremendous. And I think he does have a very high football IQ as well. So there were a ton of plays. Like, there was a player, remember from the preseason last year, where he broke up a pass on, it was like 3rd and 8 or something like that when they were playing the Chiefs in that first preseason game. And he broke onto the receiver. He identified the receiver over the middle in that kind of soft spot of the zone, which would have been wide open. They would have moved the sticks. And he broke onto the receiver before the ball was out of the quarterback's hand and ended up making a pass breakup on the play. And he jumped out of the zone he was in to make that play. And I thought it really exemplified that he has a great ability to identify and dissect these plays in real time. And I think having that instinct and that football IQ can be more valuable than just having raw physical gifts. Like, yes, ideally you're going to have both. But I think that what he may lack, again, with just elite physical traits, he more than makes up for with his ability to have a high IQ and have good instincts on the field.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, it seems like, he's coming along. And obviously, if he's a starter, we're rooting for him regardless. So it's great to see that, he's making some progress. Actually, Hufanga did have some things to say about Trey Lance as well. He said that dude can sling the rock. He's been tremendous, among other things. And finally, we're starting to hear people who are actually in the building with Trey Lance, being able to say these things and get these quotes out, because all we've heard this whole offseason has been about, what Trey Lance can't do and what he's not going to be, and just kind of baseless comments from outside media. Finally, we're hearing from players and coaches themselves what they think about Trey Lance, and it seems like he is also he's also made the most of this offseason and has improved. I know it's not training camp yet, as I assume you will be at training camp this season again, right, Jordan?
Yes, I believe so. That is the plan. You know, things change sometimes, but as of now, that is the plan, 100%.
All right, perfect. What, as fans, can we, I guess, what can we make of OTAs? Because I know a lot of people talk about OTAs. It's obviously a minimal practice. It favors the offense in a lot of cases. So, what can we make of these comments? What can we make of how Trey Lance is doing right now?
I think that you can make of it whatever you'd like. That's kind of my take. I personally don't really, put much stock into OTAs because just like you mentioned, it's, mainly guys running around in shorts. There's not really too much that I think can be taken away from it, but it also kind of signals the beginning of the NFL calendar. Football's back. The 49ers are back. So I'm never going to rain on anybody else's parade and say that you shouldn't care about OTAs. And I'm not saying I don't either. I just think that like the mini camp that's coming up on the 16th will be much more important. And then obviously training camp when that rolls around. But hey, football is back. The 49ers are back. It's fun. It gives us something to talk about. It's nice to see you have little things like people getting to talk about Trey Lance's release. You see things like, the pads aren't on. You see Danny Gray is blazing up the field. You got defenders talking about how fast he is. So I think it's a fun time to kind of ease back into the football schedule before you really get into the grueling days of training camp, day in and day out. I think it's a little bit more lighthearted for the players. It's a little bit, there's less pressure. You're not sitting here with cuts coming up in a couple days. I just think that it is whatever you want to make of it. And I apologize if that's not a great answer, but I think everybody kind of views it differently. I just wouldn't be racing to make, predictions for the season or predictions for players based on whatever happens. But it does tell us, like right now, like Aaron Banks is getting reps at left guard. Matt Barrows was reporting that. So that to me signals that the 49ers probably have a path where they're envisioning him getting that chance to compete for that left guard spot. And I thought that was very telling that they have him on the left side after last year. He was getting all his reps on the right side during the preseason and training camp. So, you can take things away, but just do it with a grain of salt and don't, oh my God, Trey Lance threw an interception to the defense in practice today. The Niners are winning 5 football games. Like that, stuff like that. Don't do that. Like it's not going to tell you anything. But I do think it's fun that we're getting to see how these players are interacting and things like you mentioned, where I think, a lot of these players on the team were in a pretty tough spot for a while because while I do think plenty of them saw the potential in Trey Lance last year, and they had that belief in him last year, Jimmy Garoppolo was still the starting quarterback, and you don't ever want to undermine your own starting quarterback. And I think that the 49ers players actually did a very admirable job of not creating any kind of public controversy where it felt like the locker room would have been split or there were guys that felt that Trey should have been the start. That stuff never surfaced last year. Even if it was, we don't even know if it existed, but if it did, it didn't surface. So I think now it's become pretty clear, that Jimmy's most likely going to be moved at some point. Kyle said it. That's pretty much the direction that it's headed. So I think guys are a bit more comfortable coming out and voicing their support for Trey because he's essentially QB1 now. So stuff like that I think is really fun because, we get to hear that in an official quote. We get to see these actual clips of it happening. So, it's just, hey, OTAs are what you make of it, right? Like, it's just a matter of how much stock you really want to put into it. And I personally think it's more just, kind of like a preseason to the preseason, if that makes sense. Like, it's kind of like a warm up, getting back in. These guys will have mini camp. They'll have the month off. And then when training camp rolls around, that's when things are really going to start getting intense and picking up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jordan, this is a short episode, so we'll get you out of here. I appreciate you coming on. One more question, though, before we go, because I haven't had you on the pod in quite a while. Which of the undrafted free agents would you say has the best chance to make the roster?
Jordan Mason, 1000%. I think Jordan Mason's not only going to make the roster, I think he's going to be one of the more key components of the rushing attack now and going forward. I am very impressed by him as a player. I think that he's somebody that really it surprised me that he did end up going undrafted, to be honest. But I think he's next in line to be that kind of Shanahan undrafted back that they, get where everybody's like, oh, Kyle Shanahan just keeps finding these undrafted running backs. I think that he's next in line, but I'm also really excited. I saw, Jason Poe just mentioned right there. Donovan West is another guy. I was as impressed with the 49ers undrafted class as I was with the players they actually drafted. And I was impressed with the players they drafted. So
yeah,
I think it's realistic that a couple of them could end up making the final 53, but Jordan Mason is the player. And I'm not just saying that because we shared the same first name. Jordan Mason is a guy who I have a lot of belief in and somebody who I think can be very good going forward. So I'll just put that out there now, and hopefully it's something that ages well that I can come back and retweet this episode a few months from now.
I think it will. I mean, I feel like he definitely has like the advantage of just being an undrafted running back in Kyle Shanahan's offense. Like, let's face it, a lot of those guys in the past have had success. So yeah, very excited to see him throughout training camp. But again, thank you so much, Jordan, for coming on today. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you subscribe. I teased that I'm going to be doing a giveaway for a Frank Gore signed jersey. So that announcement is coming very, very soon, or like the actual official giveaway will be starting very soon. So just keep it locked. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel because that is one of the things you will need to do to be entered. So enjoy your guys this weekend. Enjoy your guys this Friday, Thursday, and go Dubs. Let's go.